but it's all good. So now we're just using what's inside of Zoom. So that's all good. So how are we doing?
Good.
Okay, certainly glad to be here. It's always great being a native Houstonian to participate in any Juneteenth celebration, considering we were the first state to actually make Juneteenth a statewide holiday. Before we start, I do want to give a shout out to someone who I think is deserving. His name very rarely comes up, but he is actually the state senator who actually made Juneteenth possible. He died earlier this year, and I'm speaking of Al Edwards. He was the one who carried the water for a number of years to actually make Juneteenth a statewide holiday, and oftentimes doesn't get mentioned, but we certainly want to rest in peace to Al Edwards, as well as to his family. And so he is known as the Juneteenth man. He actually passed away April 29th. And so I wanted to say that. One of the things I think is sort of important about this every year is I think we have to constantly put this holiday in context, but also link it to present day. I think we make a mistake with Juneteenth by, well, oftentimes like holidays, people who focus on celebrations and picnics and things along those lines, and realize that the celebration of Juneteenth is because Texas slaves found out 2 years late. But 1865 also then kicked out 12 years of Reconstruction. And then, of course, that lasted through 1877, the Great Compromise of 1877, which led to 92 years of Jim Crow. I think to link it to today, we are operating in what I call the third Reconstruction. Reverend William Barber, actually, that's the name of his book. You look at what's happening in the wake of George Floyd. You're seeing massive change take place all across this country. Folks, it hasn't even been 3 weeks since George Floyd was killed. And so I'm saying that because I really think that as we go out and as we talk about Juneteenth, as we talk about what Juneteenth means, I really think we need to be redefining for folks today that we should be in a reconstruction mindset. That is, as we talk about how do we attack systemic racism, the George Floyd death has now gone beyond police brutality. You now have folks tearing down statues of King Leopold in Belgium. You now have folks talking about the statues, of course, of Confederate heroes. I mean, all these things are happening. That's how things are moving. And so we need to be, I think, as African Americans, defining how do we view this third Reconstruction and what we ask for. So I don't want Black organizations right now asking for or accepting corporate donations. What they really should be saying is, what are the massive investments in Black infrastructure? And I think if we start thinking that way, the same way they did during the first Reconstruction of 1865 to 1977, the second Reconstruction from 55 to 1968, we need to be thinking about that. So this is not a 6 month, a year thing. This is really a 12, 15, 20-year thing to really begin to address all the fundamental issues. And education is one of those issues. It's one of those things that we also have to think about. There's a phenomenal book that I love. It's called The Education of Blacks in the South, 1860 to 1935. This Black people, freed slaves, they are responsible for education being publicly financed in the South. So I love it when people try to say, we don't care about education. How in the hell we don't care about what we actually created being publicly financed? And so I think that's just sort of where, which is why for me, the reason I support charter schools, because I want us to run our schools, to educate our children, to control the curriculum, to control the budget. Black folks educating Black kids, running the whole thing ourselves. And so I just think that's sort of, for me, how I sort of operate when I think about Juneteenth every single year. It is a constant renewal of the commitment to the reconstruction of our communities.
Excellent.
That's your kickoff.
Go for it, Nissa.
You're on mute, Nissa. There you go.
That's it, Roland. Thank you. I thought we were going to have you talk much longer than that, but
No. Okay, hold up. No, they told, okay. I have here, they say this is a 30 to 45 minute panel.
so I'm ready to go if everybody else is ready to go.
Yes.
So is it a panel?
It is. So
The
we're
panel-
going to, so let's do the panel.
The panel is after Roland speaks.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. So literally the email that I got says I'm participating in a 30 to 45 minute panel.
Let's not do this here.
Oh, no. I'm like, I'm cool. So I can do the panel. So I'm like, let's roll.
Let's do it.
Cool. All right.
And when I told my friend that we're going to have you talk first, I'll quote her. She said, "We need to have our history lesson before we can discuss anything."
Okay.
So you could not have done a better job kicking us off, giving us that history lesson, sharing with us the real moment here and the history of Juneteenth and why we should really appreciate this moment and put it in context.
Cool.
So thank you so much, Roland.
Yes.
So let me introduce myself. I don't know if Helen or Christina was planning to do that. Nisa Flagger. I am Division Counsel at HP Inc., one of the sponsors of this event. I'm also Vice Mayor of Los Altos, so I wear different hats in the community, and I am so excited to be here. It's an honor to be the moderator, and I'm very excited to represent HP at this event. I also wanted to give a shout out to Leslie Slayton Brown, who is HP's Chief D&I Officer. She is a champion of so many initiatives at HP, and her leadership these past almost 3 weeks has been amazing. Because as you know, a genuine leader is not a searcher of consensus, but a molder of consensus. And so I really wanted to identify and recognize Leslie for all the work she has done for HP and the broader community. So let's talk about what has happened these past 3 weeks and put it in context, as Roland said. What we would like to do is for each panelist to introduce themselves. As Helen mentioned, we have your bios on the website. So we do not need for you to share with us all the wonderful and great things you have done over the years. What we're looking for is just your current title, role, the organization you may represent. And then I will ask each of you, after you do that introduction, to share with us one word that sums up how you've been feeling the last 2.5, almost 3 weeks. So I will go down the list I have, and Roland, I will include you with that last one word to sum up how you've been feeling. But I will start with Reverend Montgomery. Can you hear me, Reverend Montgomery?
Yes, I just had to unmute myself.
Okay,
Good evening, everyone. My name is Reverend Ray. I am the Executive Director for People Acting in Community Together, better known as PAC, here in Santa Clara County.
Thank you. Eileen.
Hi, Eileen Casnave, and I am General Counsel at MemSequel. I'm also the General Counsel for the African American Community Service Agency, President of the 100 Black Women, and Vice President of California Association of Black Lawyers. And my one word is hopeful.
Hopeful. Is Chappie on yet? Vice Mayor Jones? Has Chappie been able to join us? I know he's been in meetings all day. Okay, let's move on to Lisa, former mayor of East Palo Alto.
And good evening. Thank you so much. And Roland, it's good to see you. I normally get to see you at CBC, so good to see you here. Lisa Gaucher, City Council member in East Palo Alto and Government Affairs Manager at an education tech company, study.com. I will say I want to be encouraged by what our youth are doing, but at the same time, as a mom, I'm frightened and sad.
Okay, hopeful, encouraged, frightened. Carrington Kenny.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carrington Kenny. I'm currently a rising senior at Milpitas High School, and I am vice president of my school's BSU.
Thanks, Carrington. And then Pastor Reynolds.
Pastor Jason Reynolds. I'm the senior pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church in San Jose, California. Also adjunct professor at Evergreen Valley College in the ethics department, along with a member of the chief advisory board to the chief of police in San Jose.
And what's the one word that sums up, and I know there may be many, but just one word that can sum up how you've been feeling these last 2.5 weeks?
I'll leave it as open. I'm open. Yeah.
Thank you. And Carrington, I'm not sure you shared your word.
Sorry, I meant to say motivated.
Motivated. Wonderful. And Roland, back to you. Do you have a word to share with us?
Of course, focused.
And we'll talk more about focused and how we can focus coming out of this movement and carrying it forward. Eileen, I want to start with you. Still focused on what's been going on in our communities, around the country, around the world these last 2.5 weeks. There have been protests in America and in over 25 countries around the world. What makes this moment different in your mind?
The advent of video. I think the fact that around the world, everyone has heard about racism. They don't quite understand the racism in the United States being different from the racism in Peru, being different from the racism in Scotland. But everybody saw the 9 point whatever minutes that occurred when someone and watched the life of a person be terminated, and the facts rise about why this happened. And I think it happened at a time too where, again, with the advent of people's cameras and video, we are being able to real time see people shot in their homes, to see individuals pulled out of a car and shot. And I think the ability to actually see it with your own eyes, and to be able to say, you know, this is not, it's like the rising of our nation when apartheid, when we were challenging apartheid. We were able to see that because video was brought in through TV, and I think once you're able to actually become more aware and understand with your, you know, it's not false facts or whatever it is that certain people are trying to say, it gives rise to an understanding and the humanity in all of us worldwide that says that's not acceptable. And even if I'm, you know, miles and miles and miles away, I'm going to stand up and have my voice heard that that's not okay.
Yeah, I agree, Eileen. Video, social media, and you know, you mentioned the almost 9 minutes. I remember when I marched with my son, my family, and we, you know, you kneeled at the end. I remember explaining to him what that represented, and he kept saying, "This is a long time."
Exactly.
So I don't know if Chappie has joined us, but Lisa, same question. What do you think makes this moment different?
You know, good question. I think it just feels different right now, right? You know, the time and why this is different. You know, we were in a place where everybody was sheltered in place and COVID was happening, and our attentions were in the right place. It feels different because the youth are motivated and active, and they are not taking no for an answer. I know if adults have told youth not to protest, and they're like, this is my time. So this feels like with the marches and the protests, and if you look at the crowds, they're so diverse. You have so many different faces, and when we walk together. I have people who are white who are saying, what can I do? People are saying, what can I do at this time right now to make a difference? It feels right, it feels different, it feels like we're gonna move forward, and this is the time. I agree, we've gotta make a difference now. The time is now, it's right to change the way the police are treating our community.
Thanks, Lisa. And Carrington, being a high school student, I'm curious to get your perspective. I don't know how much you can compare this moment to, but does this moment feel different for you? What resonates?
I think the part of this movement that feels so different is that in past situations, people just kind of see it and graze over it. And this time you're seeing everyone from different communities like as frustrated as we are. And I think it's a beautiful thing. Also, you know, it's unfortunate the way that people had to, you know, join in on the movement, but I'm glad that people are opening their eyes finally and hearing us and seeing that this is a problem. And people are out here every single day protesting because they want change too. I mean, So I just think that's the biggest part that's different from the past situations, that people of all different races understand, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. So people are like, you know, if I have to go for a good cause, it is what it is. So I'm glad that everyone's out here.
Thanks, Carrington. And Reverend Montgomery, both Eileen and Carrington mentioned COVID. The fact that all of this is happening during a global pandemic crisis. And I know a lot of churches were reaching out to their elected officials and asking, when can we have church reopen? At a time like this, we really need our churches. And so I wonder if you could give us your perspective about this moment in the context of COVID and how the church community has embraced it.
Thank you for the question. First, I think it brings us to a point of pausing, not to over spiritualize. My position is, and the position of over 100 faith leaders in Santa Clara County, is that it would be a liability to open churches. That's just irresponsible. And I would call it spiritual malpractice. What there should be a call for the clergy is from a prophetic place, that those who have sat complicitly on the sideline, who are silent, who so-called claim a God, yet have no idea what the characteristics of living that faith out means. That's what churches should be doing. We should call ourselves into account. We should have reflection on our theological position. We should all be in a position of demanding justice, but related to opening up a church just for the sake of being inside of a building, that's the liability. The church is in us and it's not the building. So during this time of COVID, true theologians have had the ability to reassess how we do church, how we look at church, and how we look at our community. And what are the things that we need to reevaluate? How are we looking at ourselves as brothers and sisters? How are we living out our faith? And that's regardless of whether or not you are a Christian or a Jew or Muslim or John or whatever your background may be. We're all called to live in relationship with our faith, whoever we call our God. We're called to live in a right relationship with each other, and we're called to live in a right relationship with creation and nature. So if we're not relationally connected to all of those, and we can't see ourselves as each other, a damn building won't do any good.
Thank you. Pastor Reynolds, I will ask you another question, still related to what has been happening, but I'm going to widen or extend the time period. How has the movement for Black lives changed in the last 5 years? So not just in the last 3 weeks, but in the last 5 years. And based on what's happening today, what do you predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Or maybe what do you hope will happen based on what you're seeing today?
Thank you for the question. So 5 years, and I may even say, let's look at 6, right? Because 2014 really is kind of like that seminal year. 2014 is Eric Gardner, and that's like the first time we hear I Can't Breathe. And then we move it now 6 years forward and hear it again. And so there are a number of things that don't allow us to make some of those movements. And many people have, even in our local area, started working after Trayvon Martin. And I think that's one of the challenges. You know, we always have these big moments, these impetus immediately, but it's the long term, right? It's the arc of justice bends, you're like long term. And so how do we continue to work this forward? I think in 5 years, the things that we will see, even though I think there definitely being some things that are expressed right now, is if we are not careful, we will see a huge outpouring now. Then we will see the trailing off of that energy. We will see people feeling like we've come far enough. I don't need to continue to put that level of effort and energy into it. And we will stall before we get over the finish line. And so I'm hoping that we can start already infusing that we need to have a long-term view, that we need to get what we can now, but know that that doesn't mean that we get all the way into the end zone. And just one touchdown doesn't win us a game, right? And so there might be many touchdowns that we need to get to now get us to where we're really trying to do. And how do we define where we're trying to go? What does it rightly look like? What is the beloved community? What does human flourishing look like for Blacks, for those of African ancestry, those who are Latino? What does that look like? And what do we really want to push America to grab in that view? So,
but that can only happen if That can only happen if you take this energy on the streets, and then it has to now then be transferred into organized infrastructure. So,
Correct.
so if you study movements, if you just look at sort of how things happen, how things are shaped, how they're built. I'm gonna go back 10 years ago. So who recalls the May Day protests all over the country? You had 1 million Hispanics, Latinos marching in Los Angeles, 1 million in Chicago. You had 500,000 in Houston. You had these massive marches. But here's what happened. You had DJs in Hispanic radio who were driving this. And people kept saying, this is great, this is wonderful. We don't have one leader. This is how it's done. And I'm sitting there going, but that's the protest part. But you gotta have infrastructure who can now take what's happening in the streets, put it within an organization infrastructure, and then to be able to create change. So, and I kept saying, y'all, this ain't gonna last. So, what you just described will fail if our organizations are not egotistical in that they're not leading the protest. So you don't actually see the NAACP on the front line of these protests. There are folks who are there, but I'm talking about organizing, planning the protest. You now have to take the action that's on the streets and then begin to say, okay, now, how do we now begin to say, okay, how do we change laws on the city level, county level, state level, federal level? So everybody's looking at the bill the Democrats and the CDC put in on Monday. That's just federal, okay? Action is already happening in the state. Today, Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York signed legislation dealing with police reform. The Breonna's law in Louisville, getting rid of no-knock warrants. Then what's happening in, again, the mayor of Houston signing executive order, all these things are happening. So our organizations need to be in position to now take a lot of this street power and then move, but that also means data collection. What I mean by that is, okay, thousands marching. Well, then what then happens when you need people to go to the committee hearing for the school board? Mm-hmm. So how are we reaching them to say, okay, we need 100 of you showing up here. And then we're gonna need 200 of you showing up at the police and fire subcommittee where the conversation is taking place to craft a law before it goes to the city council. And so we've gotten used to, so part of the issue with Black Lives Matter is that there was this decentralized sort of infrastructure. That was also Occupy Wall Street. Well, the reason why Occupy Wall Street didn't do it anywhere because it had energy, it had enthusiasm, but it had no organized leadership. And so we must be thinking that way, not dismissing the protest, mm-hmm. but realizing that the protest serves its rightful purpose, but then also the policy piece, which may last a lot longer. That might be a year or 2 year. Last point. Unlike our previous movements, this one, you got to remember the number of white folks out there. But there are different white folks. The white boy who was 12 and the white girl who was 15 in 2007, when Barack Hussein Obama, state senator from Illinois, announced he's running for president, he's now 25. She's now 28. They are now working in these companies. And so what have we seen? The editors being fired, folks resigning, Adidas in 48 hours with Black employees and their white allies joining them creates a $100 million fund. The next 50% of our jobs are going to be Black. All these things are happening because white kids, and I'm not dismissing Black protesters, but corporate America is responding so fast because they see their children protesting and they're like, oh hell, this is the one thing America always feared. When you go back to civil war, even during the civil rights movement, when white people of conscience connect with Black people of conscience, that's what America's always feared. That's what also makes this different.
Yes.
Roland?
Critical race theory, I teach critical race theory, and Derek Bell put it, it's interest conversions. When the interest of an African American person rises to the level of an interest in a person of a Caucasian white person, there will be true change. But until our interests become their interests, there will be no change. We will have billions of dollars given to organizations, but until those changes take place across the world in the other than African American community, and I'm not dismissing our Asian brothers and sisters and everything else, but when when the haves and the have-nots join together and move forward, that's when we will see change. And if you want to read, Derek Bell, Critical Race Theory, Interest Convergence, that is what we need.
Yeah. And when we talked about what's different about this moment, it's not how it feels, but it's also how it looks. And that's what, when I was out there, when I'm watching the videos, when I'm watching news, it looks different. And I do think that is having a powerful impact. And when you were talking about how do we really make change in our communities, Lisa and I, who are both on city councils, I think we've received thousands of emails just this past week advocating for change. But how do we sustain that? How do you move from an email campaign to actually implementing real change? Roland, I want to pick up going back to what you said about moving from the protests to the organizations and getting organizations to get permanent, sustainable change. You're in the media industry. What has changed on how the media has covered this moment and the Black Lives Matter movement? And what role do you think the media plays in continuing to ensure this is not just a moment, it's not just a fad?
First, it's not the media's job to determine whether it goes from a moment to a movement. That's,
do they have a role?
Well, they have a role because their responsibility is to actually cover it. But then the question then becomes, when you say the media, what does that even mean? So for instance, 52 years ago, the Kerner Commission released their report on the examination of the 1967 race riots. Mm-hmm. They couldn't agree on much, but the one thing they did agree on was that there are two Americas, one white, one Black, and they were highly critical of the media because there were very few Black folks working in media. The first wave of African Americans in media really took place from 69 through from on, because that was all driven by the Kerner Commission report. And if you look at the numbers now, it is still 80+% of the managers and executives in media are white men. So sure, you see Joanne Reed on MSNBC, and you see Don Lemon on CNN, and you see Robin Roberts on ABC, and Al Roker and Craig Melvin on NBC, but they are having to ask approval of white executives in terms of what to cover. So when we talk about this media piece, mm-hmm. we're now also at a disadvantage because of the systemic failure of Black media. Ebony in 2020 is not Ebony in 1968. Black newspapers, the Chicago Defender of 2020 is not the Chicago Defender of 1968. So what we had during that period, we had a Black media infrastructure that was unbossed, that took directions from Black people in covering Black people, and we're not asking permission. This goes back to controlling the narrative. And so the concern, so I'll give you an example. When DeRay, one of those groups, they released, this was a few years ago, Black Lives Matter. They released a set of policy initiatives. And they gave the scoop to the New York Times. And about 3 or 4 days passed, and they hit me up and they were like, well, why hasn't it gotten traction? I said, because you took some policy initiatives to white folks and you didn't come talk to your Black base first to then get buy-in and then go to the white folks. I said, so why would you take it to the New York Times? Because see, they were, oh, but it's the New York Times. I said, when I'm on the Time during the morning show at the time, and we're talking to 8 million. See, so they were thinking like mainstream, yeah, but it's the New York Times.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, but that's not where Black people are watching and reading.
Right.
So part of this deal also is from a movement standpoint is in local communities and states and nations. How are you effectively utilizing Black media to reach Black people first? And then you begin to take your message into mainstream media, because if you do it reverse, what you're going to end up happening is you're talking to all these white folks and your Black base has no idea. But then when you're looking for the people who are going to really have your back, which is your Black base, they're uninformed because you never talked to them first.
Wow.
Got it.
Wow.
Thanks, Roland. Carrington, you have been in the news recently. Do you mind sharing your experience being in the news, what happened, and how your life has changed since?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, one of the teachers at my school on Halloween decided to do blackface. And I go to a predominantly like Asian, there's not many Black people there. So he didn't have any Black people in his class when this had happened. And considering, our education system doesn't really teach people that all of our Black history, the students in the class didn't quite know if that was right or not. So they didn't say anything until it came to my attention. One of my other friends had shown me the video and I was like, what is going on? He came to school and he painted his face Black, and he didn't get caught until after he already taught 2 periods in which our vice principal, another Black lady, had actually told him that offended me. And, no one else said anything besides her. So I posted that on Twitter, and then a lot of the administration had saw it. They weren't aware that it had happened. It wasn't a big deal until someone said something about it, and then it blew up. And people started calling the school furious that this had happened. And then the news ended up contacting me and they asked if they can do an interview, and then everything just kind of went on from there. So since then, I was invited to speak at the Women's March. So I was actually the youngest panelist to speak there. And I kind of just spoke on, the Black experience in America, what it's like, what they're not teaching us. They don't tell us about all the great things that we have done, and then they kind of skim over the injustices and everything we have been through, which is why people aren't quite understanding where we're coming from and why we're so angry. So like when the situation happened, some people were like, you could have just told them you were upset instead of posting it. So it's like, why do our injustices always get diluted? That's instead of you being mad at the person who actually did the incorrect thing? So, for me, anything that I see that is wrong, I will speak on it. It doesn't just have to be the Black community, because I think being Black people, we understand what it's like to be discriminated against or what it's like to be on the other hand of the situation. So it's like, I see something in the Asian community, that's not right. I'll tell you you're wrong. Mexican community, that's wrong. Why would you do that? It's an open thing. It's not just for the Black community. I'm injustices anywhere, I'm saying something. So that's basically what's been happening. And actually tomorrow I'm speaking at a protest here in Milpitas. It's ran by the NAACP. So watch out for that speech. So, yeah.
And what have you learned? And that's just amazing what you did and how you handled it. I've read about it. It's been on social media. It's just a proud moment to read about our youth taking stands. And as you said, injustice against anyone, we understand, and we stand against all injustice. What have you learned? In 1 or 2 sentences, what have you learned from this experience?
I've really learned that you might think that people understand, but they really don't. So, once you see something, you need to speak. That's why we all have voices. Everyone says, oh, it's okay to have your own opinion. I'm like, okay, well, here's mine. So I just think it's important that you speak out as soon as you feel uncomfortable, because the longer that we sit in silence, no one's going to hear us regardless. So you have to start speaking as soon as you see something that's wrong.
Yeah. With Carrington's, I think our future is bright.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Because even as an adult, you're going to come across some of that. I work for an organization, and I was in a meeting. I managed to get out and get my hair done. And in a meeting, a boss asked me about my hair and said my hair looked nice. And then he said, your hair looked, he told me my hair looked a mess before. So in my natural state, he was telling me my hair looked a mess. And I'm like, wait a minute. I was like, that is the worst thing you can tell a Black woman.
Exactly.
Because my hair in its natural state is not ugly. And because I don't have straight hair doesn't make me not beautiful, right? So I had to call him on it. And he said he appreciated it. He goes, I didn't know that that was going to be offensive. You know what? There are times when I'm tired of educating other people on how to treat me. But thank you for stepping up for yourself.
For sure. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Lisa. So Milan did a great job of having, you know, nonprofit organizations, clergy, law, city council, media, and the youth represented on this panel. So I do want to go down the line, and I know Roland has already given us the media perspective. I'll start with Eileen, who I've known for a long time. In the legal world, what role, and I know you wear many hats.
Yes.
In the
but
legal
we
world.
are busy. I mean, we are busy.
What role do you play? How can you make a difference in this moment? And I know you talked about legislation. If you could talk about that, I think that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. At the state level, there, you know, we have, and it's interesting because it is definitely interest convergence there, because not all the bills that we are championing right now are drafted by African Americans. They are drafted by different individuals, white, Black, people of color, you know, and so so it's great. But as the California Association of Black Lawyers and all of our sister and brother organizations, we are pulling together and standing. Every time we hear that there's legislation that's in process, we are meeting with state assembly members, and we are moving forward to draft letters of support. As a general counsel of a software company, our Women's GC Network, we drafted legislation to Congress on several issues. And I think hopefully all organizations that have the ability to impact the laws that are taking place right now at the city, county, state, federal level are doing so, and we're actively engaged, because that's truly where change takes place with respect to the law and with respect to, you know, making sure that laws that are ineffective are removed, and laws that need to be put in place are, understanding that legislation only goes so far, right? We have to actually work on the behavior that, you know, we're legislating, and also that when we create legislation, that there are penalties associated. We were talking yesterday about the chokehold, and one, you know, we had to make sure that we were defining it properly, because we don't want to just say chokehold. We want to say any action that reduces the flow of air to your brain, any action that impacts the carotid artery, which is a way to sustain to make a person be immobile. Any of those actions, but then what happens when the person does that? So if we create legislation that is meaningless, that's even worse, right? To have something there and then no one is held accountable for it. From the legal part, both in organizations, in social justice organizations, and within corporations, you know, I think the change within a company also comes into play, because there's obviously lots of compliance, regulatory compliance that we can focus on to ensure that diversity and inclusion takes place within a corporation. So I've been super busy.
Thanks, Eileen. Pastor Reynolds, does the clergy have a role? Can the clergy make a difference?
Absolutely. I wouldn't be clergy if I didn't think so, right? And I think our role is multifaceted. There's one part where, you know, legislation doesn't change the human heart. And so as much as we can talk about all the policies and the laws we put in place, those laws are really meant to be protections for when things go wrong. And really the clergy is constantly working to how do we get the heart of humanity, all people right in such a way where then we don't have to worry about the laws as much, right? Like that's the gift of what the beloved community can be when we have right people. And of course we know that will never be, it probably won't be till we get to heaven at some point, but that's what we work on. is to raise the consciousness of not just the Black church, but even white evangelical churches, for Unitarian churches, for all of those that can speak from we are created in the image of God. And so if that is true, any image bearer ought to have the same rights and experiences under that notion. So of course that is there. And then from a institutional position, much of work that has happened, even during the civil rights, came out of the Black church. And that was because of this marrying of the consciousness and the soul of humanity along with policy and organizing. And we still are in that vein. There are a variety of them all over the country that are mobilizing, getting people, consistent audiences to help us understand and hopefully give us the spirit and the nourishment for our souls to keep going, right? So like, when this is not in vogue 3 months from now, we're still preaching that the gospel has a meaning, and that meaning is to get us moving forward. So of course, I think that we have a role and a seat at the table.
Agree. Lisa, going back to what Roland said, and there are different levels of government, as we all know, and there are things happening right now at the federal level. But what are some of the things we can do at the local level in city government? There's been calls to defund or reform police departments, as you know. There's Obama's 8 Can't Wait. We have the mayor's pledge. So there's a lot going on and a lot being asked of local governments. What do you think local governments can do? What difference can they make? And how should the community hold us accountable?
Well, let's be really honest. We know that as elected officials, we report to our communities, and most communities don't understand that your job doesn't end when you check a box and you vote for somebody. You have to show up for council meetings. You have to show up wherever, and you have to remind us what our work is, what work we should be doing. I am often at the council. I'll tell people, sometimes we're trying to make decisions and we are not hearing from the community. And then we go with the biggest mouth, those who are making the most noise. But we're setting the policy. Let's be honest. Police are working in our communities, and we have a right to make sure that our community is protected. The policy has to change within the communities at the council level. We need to make sure that police officers who are bad actors can no longer just stay in a workforce, or that they can go from one organization to another. When you think about the policies that are being made, if you find a doctor who commits malpractice, he's out. If you have an attorney that's not doing right, you lose your license and you're no longer employed. Why aren't we holding these police at that much of accountability? And then when you're doing something wrong, let's go further. Why are you getting a pension when you've killed somebody? Let's make sure that we're changing what we can on the local level. Police work for our community. East Palo Alto became a community, and one of the most important things that was for East Palo Alto is to make sure we had our own police force. And in that doing so, we are making sure that our police are doing community policing. It is important for them to get out their vehicles, walk the community, and get to know the community. And we need to continue to do that and make that a policy so that they are not just hovering over and terrorizing our neighbors.
I want to speak on that point. That one of the greatest mistakes that we make every single election is we say elections matter, but then we all good. 2008, when Obama got elected, I remember Wanda Sykes. She had her show. She had a weekend show on Fox, and doing an interview. She said, I did my part. I said, I'm sorry, you ain't done.
No.
She's like, what do you mean? I said, no. I said, voting is the end of one process and the beginning of another. Mm-hmm. And so the mistake that we make is we check out. We go, all right, cool, y'all voted, I'm good. If we voted for somebody and they won, we then got to make sure that they do what they said they were going to do. The flip side is, if we voted and the person we voted for lost, we're still constituents. And so what happens is, for a lot of us, we check out. There are a lot of us who live in Republican areas. They're like, yo, man, my congressman's a Republican. But you're still a constituent. Loretta, so just two things. Loretta Lynch. All these sisters were going to Capitol Hill. Gonna put pressure to confirm her as Attorney General. I was like, where are all these brothers? I'm like, where are the male civil rights leaders, whatever? So Jeff Johnson, Jamal Bryant, Pastor Jamal Bryant, myself. So we said, yo, we're gonna call brothers to Capitol Hill. More than 200 black men showed up. So we go to Capitol Hill. Yo, security, if you wanna understand how they feel about black men, when 200 black men rolled up on the US Capitol, let's just say there were enough cops to handle 20,000 of us. So we're going through and we're visiting offices. And most of these brothers had never in their lives been to Capitol Hill. They live in Maryland, Virginia, and DC. They had never even gone to the US Capitol. So we go meet with the late Senator Thad Cochran of Mississippi. So we go into his office and we say, we'd like to meet. So I said, I need a brother from Mississippi, come to the front. Remember, your constituent. Oh, well, his schedule is full. I said, we'll wait. And so then they were like, well, you know, and mind you, it's 50 of us packed in this little office. That was by design. I wanted them to feel the intensity of 50 black men. So a sister we had a meeting and she was nearby. She says, well, you know what? They can take 10 of my minutes. They said, she goes, the white receptionist goes, no, we can't do that. So then they asked us to wait outside. We were like, no. And then finally they gave us some time. And so he comes in, walking real slow. I mean, he was like 80 something. I said, Senator, we wanted to come here. We just wanted to impress upon you that we want you to vote for Loretta Lynch. I said, now, Senator, because I was leading the conversation, and actually I think we periscoped. I said, Senator, let me remind you that black people crossed over during your runoff to keep the Tea Party Republican from winning. That's how you came back to the United States Senate. So you owe black people your re-election. So we fully expect you to vote for Loretta Lynch, because if you don't, we'll be back. And he goes, well, I've already made up my decision, made up my mind. I'm not going to reveal it till it's the vote. I said, well, we'll appreciate that, but we fully expect it to be Loretta Lynch. Because if it's not Senator Cochran, we will be back. These brothers who had never witnessed somebody talking to a US senator or a politician, they were like, damn, bro, you were not letting up. I said, y'all need to understand that man is not sitting in the office. Y'all kept saying he's Republican, but we crossed over in the runoff, and that's how he won, because the Tea Party dude was crazier. I said, you need to learn how to use your power, even though you did not vote for him. I said, you are still a constituent of Mississippi. And I think too many of us don't understand that even if that person loses, we're a constituent. We have to use our power, and we just let it sit at home by saying, well, I'll wait for the next election. Hopefully somebody I like wins. No. I don't care who it is. Even though Donald Trump is sitting in the White House, I still fully expect black folks to get stuff. I still fully expect us to get resources, PPP loans. I expect us to get stuff. He wants us to kiss his ring because, oh, I guaranteed HBCU funding. First of all, you didn't. That was Congressman Alma Adams' bill, the Future Act. But our deal has to be that even though we don't like you, we still expect to get something out of this because that's why you're there. We have to have that attitude on every single level of government.
Right. We have to show up. And we have to demand what we want. I agree. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
But use our collective power.
Yes. Yes.
Like I keep telling AKAs, if any politician sees pink and green, they should start freaking out. But seriously, I mean, this is real quick. I just want to say this here. The Divine Nine has 2 million members.
Mm-hmm.
If follow, I mean, everybody follow what I'm talking about. If the AKA said, okay, March, this is June, the July City Council meeting, we got that. 100 show up. Delta say we got August. Alpha say we got September. Kappa say we got October. Omega say we got November. Now all of a sudden, in our colors, everything, Now all of a sudden, they are seeing, you realize that the Black Divine Nine is the most sophisticated infrastructure in the Black community. We are vertical and we're horizontal. We're international, national, regional, state, undergrad, grad, and we have youth programs. We have untapped power. And that's the
I want to add to that.
Oh.
I want to add to that, Roland.
And
you have the 100 Black women. You have the 100 Black men.
Right.
You have the links of the Links Incorporated. You have the Jack and Jill of America. I mean, if you think about the fact that we actually had a call with one of our assembly members yesterday, if we took the Divine Nine, the Jack and Jill of America, the Links, the 100 Black women and 100 Black men, CARES, there are so many of us. If we all literally came together, and there is a charge. I know for a fact that from the women's side, you know, we are actually getting ready to start working together. This would be that's when you talk about taking the protest to the streets into the community. That's the way it's going to come in, because those organizations are ready to do the STEM programs for their kids. They're ready to write legislation on their advocacy side. They're ready to do economic empowerment on the economic empowerment side. They have education committees. So all of those, all the things that we need to move forward, we have those structural organizations ready, and that's how that protest is going to move in. It's the support of the Divine Nine, and I want to say the fabulous 50, because there's a bunch of organizations that are out there.
Right. Yep. Right. So I want Reverend Montgomery to weigh in here from a nonprofit organization perspective, but I do want to share with our audience members, we will have time at the end for Q&A. I think we have a good 20, 30 minutes for you to ask your questions. So I'm looking at the time at 7:15. I'm guessing in the next 10 minutes, we'll move to Q&A. So if you'll bear with us, hold those questions. I know I see the Q&A, I see the chat room. We have not forgotten you, and we know you're listening eagerly. Reverend Montgomery, nonprofit organizations, you know, when people think, and I know that's not true, but they normally think of nonprofits as providing a support role. What leadership role do you think nonprofit organizations have in this moment to make a change? Because, you know, you talk about having, you know, big nonprofit organizations, not just here in Santa Clara County, but nationwide, and the impact and the work they're doing in the different communities. So they are directly in touch with community members. What is your role to lead in this space?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking. First, I want to delineate what nonprofits are. First, you have direct service non-for-profits who provide a service to a group of individuals. Then you have non-for-profits like PACT, Pico, California, and Faith in Action, who are grassroots organizers. To Brother Roland's point about organizing, the sustainability of organizing. How do we take the voice of these young folks and transition it into organizing, which creates policy that gives us guidelines and hold us accountable? How do we then take the heart and hold our electeds and stakeholders accountable from a moral, prophetic theology of resistance perspective? It starts with grassroots organizing. Now, we just talked about a linear and horizontal perspective of power, which I'm all with, because I'm a part of the Brothers of Kappa Alpha Psi. But what we cannot forsake.
That's a little youth group.
All right, now you know.
That's another hour.
It's all right, Brother Roland.
It was sitting right there. I couldn't pass it up. I'm sorry.
Hey, I have a picture of us. I have a picture of us together, and I'm gonna have Newt Wannabe right next to it as a meme. But to your point, the sustainability is the grassroots organizing, and what we can't leave out of the equation, because right now what has happened is the ancestral blood that has been shed on this land is crying out, and the youth in the street are speaking. The streets are speaking. The only way this is sustainable and how we move it, as Roland said, over the next 10, 20 years for systemic change, for economic and social economic change, is through grassroots organizing. So the benefit that we have with organizations like myself who do grassroots organizing is our responsibility is to help those who are most impacted. We have to get close to the pain. You have to be able to relate to it. You have to be able to identify it, even if you're privileged as we are on this call. We must get close enough to the pain so that we can develop relationships and trust, so that those who are most impacted will allow us to develop leaders within themselves, where they can speak for themselves, where they can speak truth to power, where they're no longer looking for fish, but they say, damn it, I got my own fish pole, my line, whatever, and I can fish for myself, and I'm going to teach my neighbor how to fish for myself. So not only are we looking at policy change, which gives us credence to hold the people accountable, not only do we have the prophetic voice, which says, from a moral perspective, if you call on the name of a God, you have a responsibility. We're going to bring in not just 50, but we're going to bring 1,000 and pack them into your office until you do what's right. We don't care about who wins the election, because elections are won and lost. But there's a moral responsibility that we have. People, through grassroots organizing, underestimate the power that they have. And what we seek through faith, interfaith, is to teach and train leaders, build capacity, build power, so that the streets move from just protesting and marching to changing policy, demanding policy, holding stakeholders accountable, and then becoming those leaders. As Roland said, the children who were 18 and 15 are now 25 and 28, and their parents are like, whoa. So that's the systematic change. That's the sustainable change that we're looking from grassroots organizing non-for-profits who look to develop leaders at the most impacted area and level.
So we mentioned Obama's 8 Can't Wait, and of course the mayor's pledge. And I've heard so many people say they appreciated, getting the 8 Can't Wait, because it's very specific, it's actionable, because it's difficult for a lot of groups, organizations, individuals who want to help to figure out how to help. So I will start with Roland. This question is really open. You could recommend a book, you could recommend a movie, you could recommend one step someone can take tomorrow that could make a difference. So Roland, do you want to kick us off? And then we will go to audience questions, and I will bring it back to the panel to give closing statements. So Roland.
Okay, something that, okay, so you had mentioned.
It could be a book, it could be a movie, it could be just one thing. I mean,
okay,
it's actionable.
I'll grab, actually, well, this is actionable. I'll grab this one. Hold on. Luckily, I have a home studio, and I got like 1,000 books here. So
I think with shelter in place, a lot of people have home studios.
No. I got a home studio.
Okay.
This is a huge green screen behind me.
Wow.
And camera and light. So yeah, we got a studio. All right. So there are, I think I probably sold more copies of this book than even his children. But probably one of the most important books is Dr. King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. This book here, he wrote this book in 1967. It was his worst selling book. You gotta remember, America hated Dr. King for the moment he gave the church speech at Riverside on April 4th, 67. And if you can, he lays out fundamental issues in terms of Black folks, white folks. He lays out a game plan. This is literally, you read this and you read it and you go, wow, he knew exactly what was going to happen. But the reason I think this is important, because there's a piece here that when I was talking about, again, the infrastructure in terms of, this is what he says. There are already structured forces in the Negro community that can serve as the basis for building a powerful united front. We've already heard it here. Negro Church, we've already heard it here. The Negro Press, the Negro fraternities and sororities, and Negro professional associations. He's talking about infrastructure. He lays it out in here. You will read this and go, how is he writing in 1967 about exactly what we're dealing with in 2020? And when people have read this, have been totally blown away. And it really serves as a blueprint, because he's talking about also about organizing. I think that far too many of us, we think singular. We're not fully understanding and accepting of organizing. What Reverend Dr. William Barber is doing with the Poor People's Campaign, they are organizing. They're going to white states, Idaho, Kansas, Wyoming, organizing poor white people in that mass movement. And so it would be easily, where do we go from here, chaos or community?
Great. Eileen? You're on mute.
I would challenge every single individual that works for a company to go to their recruiting coordinator and ask, where are you sending your recs? And then I would turn and assist that person in sending it to the African American Accounting Organization, NSBE, the African American Engineering Organization, CABLE, the California Association of Black Lawyers. There's Association of Black Law Students, Association of Black Accountants. I think that until we get the well open and full of candidates, and we get that pipeline so jam-packed with African American names that there is no way you can say we can't find a qualified person to fit that bill. And I think it's on us as African Americans to help make that happen. I'm not saying that the victim has to find the solution. I'm not going there. But I am saying that if we do want to affect change, that we have to assist in making that happen. And one way is, as more African Americans move into levels in corporate America, one, that 28-year-old white kid has a 28-year-old black kid friend at work. They all start moving together up in that ladder. Two, there are more African Americans at work working together, and we're not alone. We don't have that situation where we're one of 250 employees. We're now 50 of 250 employees, and then 75. And then there's management and there's CEOs. So to the extent that we can affect change in the corporate world, I think that is one element of making effective change. And critical race theory, grab the book, read Critical Race Theory, Interest Convergence, understand that concept.
Thanks, Eileen. Carrington, movie, book, or one actionable item that members of the audience can take?
One book that I'd recommend, at least for the younger generations, I'd recommend The Hate U Give, because it kind of gives you like an overall summary, or it brings you to the whole experience of what it's like of just being a Black person and going to maybe a not Black school where you're singled out, and it kind of explains how some white people need to meet a Black person beforehand, before they actually start liking Black people as a whole. They're like, oh, you know what? I didn't actually like Black people until I met you. And so I'm like, oh, wow. And this book kind of just touches on everything. I mean, sometimes you have to be uncomfortable to learn something. So I definitely would recommend this book. And then there's a Netflix series called When They See Us. I definitely recommend seeing that series. I mean, I think everyone, once you see that, you'll kind of start to understand. I mean, it breaks down that barrier just a little bit if you're not going to fully get it the first time around, but it definitely opens up a conversation. So I'd recommend that as well.
Thanks, Carrington. Lisa?
Sure. So when I think about a movie or a show on Netflix, 13. For those who don't understand what's going on, watch 13, because there are a lot of people out there not understanding what is going on and why we're so angry and why we're upset about what's going on in our community. So the 13th on Netflix is the show that I would tell people to watch. I am reading Why Are the Black Kids Sitting in the Back of the Cafeteria right now to understand more. And then one thing that is really important to me when you talk about diversity in organizations, it's not enough to have a diverse program without mentorship. Because if we have a diversity programs and inclusion and you're bringing Black people in, if you're not supporting them and give them what they need, they're just going out the back door. So let's just make sure that that is happening. And then for the organizations that refuse to make a difference. And if you're working at an organization and you're only a few of the Black people there, don't be afraid to stand up and speak up and demand that something changes.
Yep. And at many organizations, including HP, you have different employee networks. And we have our Black employee network. And I looked down the list of attendees, they all showed up to support me. And that's what we do every day at HP. So that is so important. So next, Pastor Reynolds.
Absolutely. So there are a number of books that I think are great. Just Mercy is another one of those that was really helpful, and I think it's helpful for those that are watching. It also is in movie version. Slavery by Another Name, The New Jim Crow, White Fragility, and Tears We Cannot Stop. I think all of them kind of help to put together a nice piece. And for those of you that do podcasts, 1619 Project by the New York Times is a great one. White Lies by NPR, and even Uncivil. And so there are a variety of things that you can just grab. Some of those are on Netflix. You can just podcast it. And all of these things just help to add more information to what you're doing and what you want to do. For actionable items, I think we are at a place where changing the way in which we think about policing and what we truly want as a community are at the helm. And if you could jump on to beloved community PAC work that is going on locally, there are a number of ones that are happening not just in San Jose, but in Fremont and Milpitas, and it's to get involved, to add your name to those, to show up to those meetings. There was a civic council meeting today with the mayor, vice chair, and it was all about, hey, we need to change funding. And we all know where the dollars don't shift, then the heart isn't there. And if we can't shift those dollars to those programmings that will help eliminate the need for some of those policing, then we'll miss the boat. And so get involved in those places. This is the time to make it happen.
And Pastor Reynolds, just to follow up on that, one easy action item there is to send an email to your council member saying exactly that. Correct. They need to hear from you. And then Reverend Montgomery, you can close us out and bring us to 7:30 so then we can open it up to Q&A. A book, a movie, an action item.
Well, I'm Grassroots, boot to the ground. So you guys have provided great literature references for reading. But the action item is there's a both and happening right now. There are individuals that are in need. So organizations like the AACSA, they need volunteers. They need your money, right? They're just not begging for no reasons. For individuals who can give, I say give. Then those who are in positions of privilege like us, find a way to get connected to the pain. Find a way to listen to the voices that are out there in the streets. Then learn how to organize. And in doing so, teach them how to organize so that their voice just does not disappear as a vapor in the wind.
Perfect. Thanks, Reverend Montgomery. So we will be opening up to Q&A, and there are two ways you can submit a question.
Happy's here.
I just want to say I'm here, and I agree with everything everyone just said.
Welcome, Vice Mayor Jones. So we'll open up, maybe you'll get a couple direct questions in the Q&A, or I'll direct some questions to you, Chappie.
Okay.
Because the audience has been waiting. So there are two ways you can submit questions. You can either submit it through the Q&A button that should be at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand, and I think Christina will help me track who is raising their hand and in what order. So I'm looking at the list of Q&A questions, and the first question, and I think this is for you, Eileen. How can organizations empower their chief diversity officers to make positive impacts within the workplace?
I believe that if you're going to be the chief diversity officer for an organization, you've got to work toward understanding all the things that are necessary to move your organization forward. So what the organization can do to assist that is by providing you the resources, by providing you the coaching. Oftentimes some of the startups have new D&I, and they don't have the ability to go to a Facebook D&I person who's been doing it for 25 years. So that partnering with D&I and finding out what are other organizations doing by actually hosting D&I events and inviting D&I coordinators to those events. I often ask, people who I work with, women's organizations, if you want to have a women's organization, you only have 7 people. Why don't we invite 6 other startups, and the 52 of us will meet together as a women's organization? So I think if an organization is trying to affect D&I, one, you've got to make sure your D&I coordinator understands the goals of the executives, what they're trying to get put in place. Two, that they have the resources and the tools to do that. And three, that they actually have the individuals who are responsible for affecting that change truly supporting, not just writing a check, but truly supporting the D&I efforts of the company.
Thanks, Eileen. Vice Mayor Jones, next question. What are we doing to empower our people now?
Great question. And actually, it's interesting. I just got out of a council meeting that went from 11:30 a.m. to just now when I hopped on this the Zoom panel. And we had probably about a little less than 100 speakers that made comments. And I was actually amazed of how many of those speakers weren't African American, even though the speakers were advocating on behalf of African Americans. So the first and foremost is we have to be engaged, involved, we have to participate, we have to come to the city council, we have to have our voices heard, we have to engage with our elected officials, and we have to make sure that we're organized, and we also have to have a very clear objective. When you approach people in power, you want to make sure that they have a clear understanding of what you're trying to accomplish and how they can help you get there. So a lot of it is around organization, it's around strategy, and people like Jason and Reverend Montgomery, and those individuals are at the forefront of leading the effort to organize and have our voices heard. So that's a key part of it.
Thank you. Eamon Graves, you have your hand raised. You can unmute and ask your question. Eamon Graves. Eamon, I think you just muted yourself. Okay, let me see if Anita Gage, and I apologize if I'm butchering your names. Anita Gage, are you able to unmute? And maybe this is something, I will go to the written questions and maybe we'll come back to the people actually calling in with questions. Maybe we can figure out how to easily unmute you so you can ask your questions live. Next question on the list. As a Black teacher, how do I empower my Black male students without making them militant? Roland, do you want to take that question?
First of all, I need them to define what's militant.
Mm-hmm.
See, I think, so let me just, Black people got to stop being afraid of being Black. What we have to recognize is we've had to modulate ourselves for so long. We've had to, take the bass out of our voices, we turn the treble up. We don't necessarily want to push the envelope, and I totally get it, but it bothers me when we say that. So what does militant mean? Is militant being unapologetic? Is militant mean standing your ground? Does militant mean teaching these young Black men to stand up and forcefully defend their position and argue their position? Well, I guess then I was militant in elementary school, middle school, and high school. So I think we got to be extremely careful that we don't suck out the militancy of youth. And what I mean by that is, if you study the civil rights movement, King was young, but he was considered, they call him DeLard. That was his nickname with SNCC. He really had an old spirit. SNCC was 18, 19, 20, 21. They clashed with King. If you go back and look at most of the most successful things that took place between 60 and 65 were actually done by SNCC. You have to have young energy fused with elderly wisdom. militancy serves a purpose. So I want us to stop limiting ourselves to this whole deal of, oh, I'm not quite sure. No, I would want to educate those young Black men to be willing to ask questions, to be willing to challenge authority respectfully, and to do so fact-based, and then demand those level of answers. You create that next generation of Black leaders. What you call militant today is a CEO tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Can I add a little bit? Can I add just a little bit on that too?
Yes, yes, you may, sir.
And if I'm hearing right, this is the pastoral lens. If I'm hearing right, it's the concern also of what will happen to these well-spoken, look you in the eye, young Black men in our current context. And I understand that fear. And I think also part of the teaching is your willingness when you stand up is that things may not always go down well. I imagine Roland can say, hey, there were times in school where things didn't go the right way or teachers didn't appreciate the way in which we spoke. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to happen.
That's right.
And that doesn't mean that you don't need to have that voice. And so I understand the fear and I understand the worry, but that doesn't mean that we need to throttle back that voice, because we need that voice. And they need to know that they're encouraged to use it, so then it doesn't come out in other ways, which I've seen coming up on the streets of Chicago. You don't have to worry about training them to be militant. They'll figure out ways, but then they won't be used as beneficially.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, Wesley Mukayama.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I'm 78 years old, so I go back to civil rights in the 60s. As Roland was saying, I was a member of CORE, Congress on Racial Equality, in 62, and I marched in Chicago. I really think that these young people are moving in the right direction. We also have a racist city in the Bay Area, Santa Clara. I sued them 3 years ago because they haven't had a person of color since 1951 on their city council.
Wow.
And we used the California Civil Rights Act to break them up into 6 districts rather than being voting at large. And we're still working on the infrastructure of getting that mayor out of that seat and her cohorts, so we can have even a police department that's under her thumb to be more civil to Asians and African Americans and Latinos. We are about 70% of the population in Santa Clara. So I want to say that I'm also the chair of the Behavioral Health Cultural Competence Advisory Council, which looks at people of color. And I think we need African Americans in our group. And I think what happens in Santa Clara County is that we do things separately. We have to collaborate more, because Santa Clara County is the only county that has a majority of Asians. We're 38%. We're larger than the white community, which is 35%. And we need to bring all of our people of colors together to fight the systems. And I work at the county. I volunteer. I'm retired. I volunteer at the county level, and I press the county supervisors. I used to be executive director of the UI-Kai Japanese American Senior Center, and we work with the city. And Chappie, I know from the gym. I see Chappie all the time at the gym. So we are. I think we are a county that's trying to work together. We need to, as you say, have blended funding so that we got to, as I really follow what Roland is saying, we've got to work through the organizations. We've got to make these protests move into the organization and make the systemic changes that we need.
No, thank you for that point. And Reverend Montgomery, I will tie Mr. Mukayama's question to a question that came in through the Q&A. I watched a video from 1973 on the Black Journal, and they talked about the same things as we are today. Can Black people actually have equality in America?
Absolutely. Not only can we must demand it. And the only way we can demand it is a complete deconstruction. I wrote and posted on my Facebook page, and I'm clergy and an ED at the same time. I said, I need decreation in order to have recreation. You know, Roland intimated that we are at the third phase of reconstruction. So in order for us to have equality and justice, that process needs to happen all over again. So how does that happen? Again, at the poll, through policies, but through a moral compass, holding electeds accountable, regardless of whether they're a Republican or Democrat or independent. What matters is that we do have the capacity, if we learn how to organize, and I keep referring to this alpha, now I have two of them on the panel, relational to the power that we have. We don't really utilize the power that we have. We have to find a way to, again, organize. So if I have a word for anyone, it's organize, organize, organize.
Thank you, Reverend Montgomery. Roland, we have a question for you.
Sure.
Social media has broadened our relationships. I recently had an acquaintance who is non-African American and a mid-sized business owner who basically said to his LinkedIn peers, I don't have a PR team to address the Black Lives Matter issue. How and what should we be saying to our non-Black friends who appear to be sincere and want to help?
So in the autobiography of Malcolm X, he wrote the story of going to one of those Ivy League schools. A young white girl walks up to him. She says, Mr. X, I love what you're doing. What can I do to help you? He said nothing. Then he walked off. Later in the book, he wrote that he regretted that exchange. He said, because he wished he had told her, I don't need you to help me with Black people. I need you to help me with your people. I think what we have to do is we have to challenge non-Black allies to deal with their communities. They are in the middle of conversations that we're not a part of. They are in the middle of conversations with their families, at the country club, at their churches, at their synagogues, at their mosques, where we are not present. What has to happen is we need white folks checking white folks. We need white folks correcting white folks on bad information. We need Asians correcting, teaching, leading Asians. We need Hispanics/Latinos doing the exact same thing. And it doesn't mean that we can't sit down and work together and talk together, but the greatest place you can be of difference is just where you are. Biblically, for people who don't understand stuff that's in the secular world, if you actually read Nehemiah chapter 2, 3, and 4, when Nehemiah went and inspected the wall of Jerusalem, it crumbled. He then got with the people. The people said, let us rebuild. When you read that, it lays out the people who built this portion of the gate and this portion, this portion. What that means is they built the portion of the gate that's right in front of them. Too often, we want to say, I want to go help them. We completely ignore the people sitting here. If you're Black, don't tell me you want to go register, vote, register that Black people should vote and we should all register, but you haven't asked your aunt and your uncle and your cousin and your niece and your nephew if they're registered. So if people would focus on where they are in their spaces, who's right around them, that's where you first deal with. That's how we challenge our allies to begin to work on folks just where they are.
Sheila Heacock. I think you went on mute. Try again, Sheila.
Thank
Come on, Sheila.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello, my sister.
My question is for Eileen Casanedas. Eileen, can you tell us what are the next steps that Black women can do push the needle forward? What should we channel our energies in for the next 4 months?
Excellent. Thank you, Sheila. Sheila is our president-elect of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Silicon Valley chapter, and will assume the role in October. So I know she and I are going to be answering this question together in the next couple of days. But what we can do, and what I'm hoping that we will do, and we are doing it on a national level, the president of the AKAs, the president of the Deltas, president of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, all the women's organizations, the presidents and their constituency are getting together and figuring out, okay, let's take our advocacy organizations and let's start working together to write legislation where the entire women's collective signs off on it, and we get our brothers involved as well. And we look into the education and we say, how are we going to take care of our babies? What are we going to do at all levels, from the 2-year-old or from the 2-month-old all the way to the 34-year-old moving into executive management at a company. And so as women, we definitely have to figure out what we can do collectively as opposed to in separate little organizations. What can we do collectively? And then as individuals, we got to take care of ourselves. We can't go, eating, not sleeping, eating wrong, not sleeping. We have to take care of ourselves as human beings as well, because we are the nurturers of large groups of people. And so as long as we work together collectively in the community and we take care of ourselves and we teach others to take care of ourselves and our health, that's our biggest focus. But advocacy, 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 which is what our organization is all about.
Lisa, this question's for you. For African American ancestry, people to be truly financially independent, we must develop, own, and grow our own businesses. Then we will truly have the tools for financial freedom and independence. We need to hear more about owning our own business, homes, financial institutions, and the very means for true independence. Can you speak to that?
Yes, and that is so important. And that goes to the financial literacy that has to take place within our communities, to understand what it means to have your own business and to be self-sufficient and to be able to be in control of your destiny is so important. We have many organizations in our communities that are helping people to become entrepreneurs. There are many organizations that are encouraging us to be entrepreneurs. What I think we've missed for the longest time is that financial literacy piece. What does it mean to own your own home in your community? And we need to teach our children what it is to have wealth and how to handle your money. I think sometimes we don't talk about that enough. What it means to manage credit, and all of those things that are important. And I tell people in our communities, like, your home is your wealth. If you can buy a house in your community, buy that and own it, and don't be so quick when something happens to sell. Because in our communities, the first thing that people want to do is sell and spend the money. And when you think about financial literacy, we can't put our wealth, wear our wealth on our back. We have to figure out how we're going to control it and keep it in our banks and make our community stronger.
And I've heard you talk about that before, Lisa, so I knew this question was for you. Helen Sims, go on. So you just muted yourself. Try again. Helen, try unmuting. Okay.
Am I okay now?
Yes, there
Okay.
you go. Thanks, Helen.
My question is for Vice Mayor Jones. We see the commitment of the community willing to make change in favor of Black Lives Matter. So do you have a sense of how open the political bodies, especially city councils, are open to change at this point?
There's, Helen, I feel like in this moment, it's like a tipping point. This has been building for generations. And because of the brutal murder of George Floyd and all the other murders and atrocities that we've seen over the years, something has happened. And the conversations that I've been having with my council colleagues and members of other city councils is totally different than conversations I've had before. I think this is a real moment that we can capitalize and make something happen. But if we don't seize the moment, I'm concerned that people will go back to their normal lives and ways of doing business and ways of governing. So we have to seize the moment. We have to hold those elected officials accountable to all the proclamations and resolutions that they've been issuing. And we want to see some concrete action. And I know Nisa and I have been very vocal about holding those elected officials accountable for actual concrete action and not just platitudes and resolutions. Mm-hmm. But this is the moment. We're in the moment.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Roland, a question for you. You mentioned the conscious Black and conscious white unity, but how do we get conscious Black and unconscious Black unity? And obviously I'm reading the question. If you don't understand it, I'm not sure I can help you. But I think I think where you talk, and obviously I'm trying to interpret the question, but earlier on you had talked about, joining together Blacks and non-Blacks together to make differences in different communities, and we need each other to move this movement forward. And maybe in our own Black communities, how do we ensure that we have that unity and joint mission to move this forward?
All right, so here's the first thing, okay? And this is probably gonna hurt some folks' feelings, but that's okay. We need to stop acting as if everybody is going to agree. They're not. I don't waste my time with unity meetings. Let me explain what that means. Unity meetings are a joke because it doesn't exist. What you should have are common ground meetings. So what I mean by that, what happens is we Black people, we love to say, if we could get all the stakeholders in the room, and then if we can get everybody to agree, y'all gonna make me cuss. That ain't happening. Okay, that ain't happening. What do I prefer? My deal is if I invite 30 people and 4 show up, I am not going to spend a second on bitching and moaning about the 26 who didn't. I'm gonna focus on the 4 who are there. And then what I'm gonna do is we're gonna focus on what we do, and then we're gonna go do it. Now, if others wanna come along and join us, great, wonderful. But we make this huge mistake constantly where we get so wrapped up in, oh my God, but if only they were here. No, because here's the other piece. We also think that the people who have the biggest groups, and it's like, we need them. No, actually you don't. Because if they actually don't want to partner, it's a waste of time. And so I think what you have to do is, when you talk about organizing, you focus on who's there, who's not. Let's say you call this meeting, you call a summit, and I've seen this happen, and people go, I've given speeches, and I gave one at a HBCU, and something happened, they got all kind of stuff mixed up, and you probably had about 30 students. And they will apologize, and I was like, I need y'all to stop. I said, do you think I speak to empty chairs? I speak to the 30. If I'm able to connect with 2 or 3 of the 30, I don't care if it was 500 or 1,000 there, because the whole point is to connect with people. That's where we have to start. We have to stop beating ourselves up about who doesn't show up and focus on who does show up. And then when you start doing the work, the numbers will then begin to grow, and then you have nothing to worry about. So again, stop having the stakeholder unity meetings, put the call out, and who shows up, that's who you work with. and lesson, and they may not look like us.
Right.
See, see, I'm about to really get real. I hear black people say, well, man, if black folks could fund this and fund that, let me tell you something right now. If I got to hit myself upside the head for some people who refuse to want to do something, and if I got a white brother or sister who is down, who wants to work, who wants to help, who wants to fund, I'm telling you, it's go time. I'm not wasting my time on that nonsense.
And to answer that question though, Nisa, I think the other question was, how do we get the up and coming African American and the up and coming white person together to move forward? And you know, one of the things that I do have to say about our brothers and sisters is that, you know, we may go to an event and we see each other and we hang out with each other and we may mingle here and there, but you know, 2 or 3 gathered in his name, right? And off we go. And I remember, you know, as growing up, what my mother used to say to me when we get somewhere, she'd say, go mingle, go mingle. And don't sit here and talk to the same folks you talk to every single time that you come here, go mingle. And I think that's one of the things that that has to change in society. You know, when I'm literally on an executive team where there's no other African American and there's no other woman either. And you know, folks go out to have a drink. I literally, it's like, God, I really don't want to go have a drink right now. I got so much to drink. I'm going to have that drink, you know. I may not golf, you know, I may not do, you know, but I think one of the things that we do have to teach our children and our, especially, you know, those that have the ability, we have to mingle and we have to get people to know who we are. And the only way we know how to get people to know who we are is we sit and we eat with them and we lunch with them and we do things that we normally don't do. Otherwise, there's 6 over here and there's 6 over here. And again, not trying to tell the victim that they have to figure out the victimization and go, you know, the oppressed have to be with the oppressor. I hope we're not going down that road. I hope what we're going down is the road where we say, you know, if we're all sitting in the cafeteria, the 6 black kids are not sitting in the back. They're sitting interspersed among all the tables so that, you know, everybody gets to meet and greet. And I think if you travel overseas, I think you realize that when you go somewhere and you realize you are the only African American in Japan and you're walking around, you can either get really angry that everybody wants to take your picture and is staring at you, or you can just start talking and engaging and they say to themselves, that is not what I heard about Black people. This person is nice. This person is charming. This person is engaging. This person is intelligent. This person is nice. It changes the dynamic one person at a time. So teach our children, go mingle. Do not come into this room and go sit 5 of you together and talk. Enjoy it for a little bit, but go mingle.
No, I like that. In the interest of time, I see Ellen and Unique, they've had their hands raised. So I'll make those the 2 last questions. We started a little bit late, so we may end around 8:10. I will take their questions and then we'll bring it back to the panel to give their closing statements. So Ellen, if you can unmute.
Hey, Sister Ellen.
Oh, hi there, my dear. How are you? I'm the National Association of Juneteenth Lineage CEO, and a day and a half ago, 45 said he was on his way to Tulsa on June 19th.
Right.
And day before yesterday, you could have never told me. I don't think he knows me, that I would be in this position. So what I've been saying since then, been on the phone up to 2, 3 o'clock every night, is I spoke to Tulsa and let them know they're not by themselves, that we are behind them, and opening the door for them to tell us what they need. And so I'm asking every Juneteenth festival in their opening ceremonies to speak on Tulsa, to let them hear that support, as well as to ask those who are connected, who know Tulsa, who understands what this is about, say something to Tulsa to help them carry on what they have to do for June 19th.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. Really appreciate that. Final thought, I see Unique lowered his or her hand. So we'll just move to closing statements by the panelists. And all we're asking each panelist to do is to share your takeaway message. And I'll start with Pastor Reynolds. What message do you want our audience to take away?
My message would be that we are in a moment, and we get to choose what will happen after this moment is over. The work that we want to do, the passion that we feel has to translate into something that's there. And also, I would say, I think it's okay, and this is coming from a pastor, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to have those frustrations, but it's also okay to turn them into positive ways of moving things and moving that needle. So that would be my final statement.
Thank you. Carrington?
My final statement would be just to educate yourself, everyone on this panel, and educate yourself so you can help educate others, because like everyone on this panel had touched a little bit, once you start educating your friends around you, then that could just spark more conversations and more people understanding where we're coming from. So definitely just get educated to educate people.
Yep, it's amazing. You just experienced it. The changes one person can make. Lisa?
My takeaway is just, this is a pivotal year, 2020. Voting, if it's never been important, it is important this year. We need to make sure that everybody's registered and that you're voting, and we need to change what's going on in the White House. But let's be mindful that voting doesn't just start in this year. We need to make sure that we show up for all elections. We need to make sure that when we put a president in the office, that we give them the Senate and the Congress that they need to make effective change. So when it's time to vote 2 years, show up and make sure that your voice is heard.
Thanks, Lisa. Reverend Montgomery?
My parting words would be, when we fail to listen to those who are most impacted, we fail to take that information and translate it into equity and justice for all.
Thank you. Eileen?
Evil flourishes when good people do nothing. I believe that. It's been something that I had on the wall when I was a kid that my mom and grandmother used to say. I believe that everybody needs to use their voice right now. If you get up in the morning, you go to work, you come home and you go to bed, and in between there, you don't do anything for society, whether it's even have a conversation with somebody to enlighten them about your relationship, black and white, racism, whatever it is, whether you are involved in an organization or not. AACSA, thank you. Black Women, National Coalition 100 Black Women, thank you. MemSequel, thank you. And our sponsors, Zoom. This is amazing. Milan was able to have Zoom be one of our sponsors for this, along with all the other sponsors. Evil flourishes when good people do nothing.
Thanks, Eileen. Chappie?
My takeaway would be, find your place. We all are searching for a way that we can make a difference or change the world. And it could be anything from protesting, organizing, running for public office, or even small, simple things like educating your community, educating your family. I mean, we just need to find our place, what's comfortable for us, but also challenge ourselves to make a difference. So my takeaway would be, find your place.
Thanks, Jackie. And Roland, close us out.
I need to remind everybody that we love talking about the Montgomery bus boycott. People love talking about this, and that, and the other. But I think what people forget is that the Montgomery bus boycott was a one-day boycott. It was planned as a one-day boycott. After 50,000 Black people didn't walk for one day, they then said, let's do this for the next 5 days. After those 5 days, they said, let's continue it. We keep talking about the 381-day boycott. But you can't look over the fact that you can't get to 381 days unless you get to first day, then second and third and fourth and fifth. And I think one of the greatest mistakes that we often make is we want to come up with these whiteboards filled with all of these things, and we want to do this and this and this and this and this, and then we have these conversations and we get deep in the weeds, and then we already on L and P, then T, and I'm like, y'all want to focus on A? The only way we're going to be able to change anything is if we simply keep things extremely simple, focus on that, as Dr. Keegan always talked about, achieve goals, celebrate those achievements, and then move to the next one. That is the basic building blocks of organizing, mobilizing, and success. We do that, we'll see change. You also have to properly measure it. If you say we want to do this here, a year later, you should come back and say, what did we accomplish in the last year? I will say the same thing for your organization. A year from now, when you have this Juneteenth event, hopefully not on Zoom, you should say, what did people talk about in 2020? And what did we accomplish in the last 364 days? If next year it's a repeat conversation of what was said in 2020, then last year was a waste.
Thank you, Roland. I want to thank everybody for calling in and participating. I want to thank each and every panelist for this very thought-provoking and timely discussion. The AACSA, great job kicking it off last night. And as we continue through the weekend celebrating Juneteenth, it's a special moment. And I do want to commend you to putting together a virtual event like this, a successful virtual event. So Milan and the rest of the team, thank you. And my takeaway is to echo what Lisa said. Please vote, register to vote, get your neighbor, get your friends. Please, it does make a difference. Milan, I don't know if you want to add anything, but thank you again. Thanks for joining. Thanks to all the sponsors.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So yes.
Can I just add one? Milan just mentioned Census 2020. Our communities need to make sure that they're counted.
That's
More
true.
than anything else, we need the funds to come to our
2020.
community. So do the census. Remind
Good
people.
point. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, Christina
Yes,
or
so-
Helen?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Let me see.
Take
Okay.
it away.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nisa, for running the panel, for moderating this evening. Thank you for Roland for kicking us off, and each and every one of our panelists. It was an amazing evening. Thanks to all of our audience who stayed. All of 100 of you are left now, but thank you for showing up. We just want to remind everyone that tomorrow, check out BayAreaJuneteenth.com. We are kicking it off at 9:30 a.m. We have lots of sessions. We have sessions on health. We have sessions on hair. We have sessions for the kids. And of course, Mr. Anthony Hamilton will be joining us as our headliner tomorrow. So,
my man.
So any questions, just send us an email on BayAreaJuneteenth.com. And also don't forget to share. Tonight's event is recorded, but it was also broadcast on Facebook Live. So we will have it there. Share it with your friends. Share with your friends about tomorrow, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Night. Bye.
Holla.
Holla.